Was like offshoot articles and this and that. So let's talk about this. On October 13th, the White House announced it was funding a 5-year research plan with about something called geoengineering, specifically solar radiation management to artificially modify the Earth's climate. This comes off some studies back in the 1800s. Bear with me here. In 1816, in April, the Tambora volcano erupted in Indonesia with such force that it resulted in something called the year without the summer. I'm not sure if you've ever heard that term before.
No, I haven't.
Back in 1816, the year without a summer, because after that volcanic eruption, the temperature of the Earth dropped 5.4 degrees. Okay?
Really?
Yeah, there was a lot of loss of life, there was a lot of loss of crops and everything. But moving forward, what scientists did, they started to measure this and they said, wait a minute. So the particulates in the aerosols from volcanoes actually blotted out the sun. So that's where this study is coming from. What they want to do is basically block out the sun by spraying aerosols into the stratosphere to reflect sunlight, just as, say, a volcano would do if a volcano was to erupt violently. So the United Nations is on board. They've recognized the potential of this, but there are so many critics that also say, wait a minute, time out. You could cause even more of a problem by experimenting with this. Seems like you've got a question. Go ahead.
No, my question is, how do you study this without doing it? So
here's the way, they didn't go too much into the article about this except for this. Here's what's going to happen. They'll start in a laboratory, obviously a laboratory. Sulfur dioxide, other particulates, things that come out of volcanoes. They're going to take those and they're going to try to find a way to block some of the sunlight out, and push it back out into space. Once they can do that in a controlled laboratory, I would expect them to try it somewhere on this Earth away from everybody just to kind of see what it's doing to the reflectivity of the sunshine. To be honest with you, though, here are some of the potential problems you could have. What if it works and you have a button and you can press these aerosols to come and go? What if you dip the temperatures too low? Things die. What if it intensifies weather events, an unforeseen consequence? There's so many different things. Also, geoengineering, they've shown on studies, it also helps spread diseases. So there are a lot of negative impacts to putting these aerosols up in the stratosphere. But here's my attitude. 5 years of research. Let's get the pluses, let's get the minuses, and then move forward if we can, or just scrap it. You know what I mean? It's not going straight out there. They're going to research this for 5 years. They're going to figure this out. And what they're saying is that they aim to answer all the questions that you would have or I would have, pluses and minuses, before anything happens from there. But it's a start. It's a study. I think it's putting a Band-Aid on a bigger problem, but...
Dump calcium carbonate, basically chalk dust, high into the stratosphere to block some of the sun's rays with the hope of stopping the climate from warming. It's called stratospheric aerosol injection, or SAI. The media likes to say it's Bill Gates' idea, but Gates is only one of many people funding the research, and it isn't his idea, it's Harvard's. The test launch for the project next month in Sweden was cancelled after people complained. But there's likely to be a test in the future, because some scientists think this could work, while others say it's a very bad idea. This video from a German science foundation shows how it could all go terribly wrong.
It is unlikely that cooling of the planet could be achieved in a uniform way. SAI would therefore produce regional winners and losers. The total global rainfall would be less. In Asia, SAI could upset the complex system governing the monsoon, on which the water and food supply of 2 billion people depends.
It could also lead to droughts in Africa and flooding in Latin America. Experts admit they aren't sure what would happen if the sun was dimmed, but we know that when it's happened because of natural events, the result was not good. The year 1816 in the United States was called the Year Without Summer, or 1800 and froze to death. Scientists now believe it was a volcanic winter created by a huge eruption in the South Pacific. As volcanic ash circled the globe, a strange fog began to appear in the eastern United States, and the month of June suddenly saw freezing winter-like temperatures that wiped out crops and livestock and led to famine. Could the same thing happen from stratospheric aerosol injection? Jens Olaf Pepke Petersen, senior scientist at Denmark's National Space Institute, doesn't think so.
The advantage is that aerosols wouldn't stay in the atmosphere for a long time, so if it turns out it's a bad idea, it would be easy to stop the experiment again.
But he also doesn't think manipulating the climate is either good or necessary. Scientists know the Earth has warmed 1 degree since 1900, but admit they don't know the normal Earth temperature, or if we are simply rebounding from a cold period 200 years ago called Little Ice Age. And while the Earth is warming, Petersen says humans and plants both do better in warmer weather than in colder weather.
And there's still more people dying from cold weather than from warm weather. The Earth has become greener, so trees are growing better than they used to.
In his new book, Unsettled, theoretical physicist Dr. Steve Koonin, former Undersecretary for Science in the Obama administration, says the weather data itself shows there is no climate emergency.
Heat waves in the U.S. are now no more common than they were in 1900. No global trends in drought or in floods. Greenland's ice sheet isn't melting any more rapidly now than it was 80 years ago. That there's no long-term trend in hurricanes over the last 100 years. You wouldn't know that, of course, if you just watched the media.
So Koonin says we don't need to go to the trouble of spreading dust through the stratosphere.
It's got a lot of downsides. Right? The most important one is once you start doing it, you can't stop. The particles settle out over a couple of years, and so you got to keep putting them up there. We should not think about deploying it unless something really bad happens with the climate.
And Koonin says the good news is that a lot of the bad